Hey guys, welcome back to the Betar Project. This episode we got Josiah Skeats. We're doing it for the second time around. Last time we had some internet difficulties, but how are you? How's out of quarantine?
Yeah, all good. I've been in quarantine the last 2 weeks, just to escape yesterday. And just as the weather turns here in England, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I seen you. Did you go out and go for a run yesterday?
Yeah, straight out.
Yeah, got some fresh air. Would have been nice.
I've got the beach about 300 meters from my house. So just
really?
to get out, run along the sea. That's so nice.
What's the English beach like? Is there a lot of sand or is it rocks?
Nothing like the Australian beach. It's stony, no sand, no surf, and it's cold, brown, grey water that you probably don't want to swim in unless it's like the 1 week in summer where the sun's shining.
And that 1 week in summer, how hot does it actually get over there?
It's on a good day, it's pushing 28.
Oh God, that's a warm day.
And the beaches is packed on anything over about 20. Good luck finding a space on the beach, mate.
So what was it like being back home? Mum's cooking again?
Yeah, so I've been away for the last 9 months and I'd only planned to be away for 2 months. So just when I arrived back and they said, okay, you have to stay at home for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That is not a chore at all, just chilling out at home with all the home comforts, mum's home cooking. I was kind of sad that it finished in a way.
Yeah. And before quarantine, you were in Norway on a secluded island. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So there's this 1 kilometer island in the Arctic Circle in Norway. And there's this luxury hotel. It's only got about 5 rooms in it. And I went out in January to manage it. And then Corona came. And so the hotel was closed. But they said, you can stay on the island, running the hotel, like just keeping the maintenance up. And so I basically spent 5 months on this tiny island in the Arctic, living with an artist and a fisherman. And it was just this amazing experience. I'd never been that far north. So when I arrived in January, in the middle of winter, it was dark the whole day. And then by the time I left, it was the middle of summer. And the sun didn't set. It just went around the horizon. And all the birds had migrated back to the island. So it was full of life. All the flowers had poked up through the snow. So it's just an amazing place to spend 5 months without really worrying about Corona because there was no one that was allowed to come to the island.
Yeah. Did that throw out your sleeping pattern with the sun not going up or not coming down?
Totally. I hadn't really expected it, but I'm amazed having been there how much of an effect the sun has on your sleep pattern. Like I'm normally the kind of person that needs at least 7 or 8 hours of sleep. But suddenly without the darkness, I wasn't tired at all.
Yeah.
And I could go to bed at 2 a.m. And by that point, the sun has started rising again. Like it will come down close to the horizon and then start rising. So it really confuses you to see the sun rising as you're going to bed. And then I could wake up at 6 or 7 after 4 hours of sleep. And I felt completely refreshed and okay.
Yeah.
And even the locals say, we hardly sleep in summer and then we hibernate in winter, almost like they're a bear or something.
It would be so easy to lose track of the days and time over there.
And even eating. There were days where I was having dinner at 11 o'clock on midnight and it got later every single day.
God.
In like the middle between winter and summer, the daylight is changing about 20 minutes a day. So every day the sun sets 20 minutes later than the day before.
Oh, really?
So that's like how fast it changes.
Wow.
And it just completely throws out your sleep pattern.
God. How the hell did you find yourself on that island?
How did I find it? I'm in a Facebook group called the Yes Tribe, which is just a community of really positive people. And a couple of those have been out there. And I'm trying to write a book about some of my previous trips. So I thought, this tiny island in the Arctic, it'll be the perfect place to escape all these distractions and go and write. And that's exactly what it was.
What was it like living with the artist?
Yeah, so there was an artist and a trumpet player and a fisherman also living on the island. And they were kind of real Vikings. They had big beards. And at first I was like, they were quite introverted at first. But then after I'd been there a week or two, we became really close friends. And they'd take me fishing and we'd cook fish for dinner. The artist invited me for dinner, and then I was like, what are we having? And he'd cooked whale and fish tongue. And I was like, I've never eaten whale or fish tongue before, but let's go. And so, yeah, I got this really amazing community with people that live such a different lifestyle from my own. And that's kind of what travel is all about.
Yeah.
For me.
And how did you get food over there? Did they hunt their own or?
So, no, we got food delivered by boat every 2 weeks. I'd have to email the supermarket. They'd box it up and put it onto the boat to deliver to us. And then it was the strangest thing. The boat would come and it would just pick up your box with a crane, drop it on the island, and then the boat would tear away. So I had absolutely no contact with the mainland at all. Like, you didn't even need to see anyone or speak to anyone. But then when Corona came and there were food shortages, I was saying to the other people on the island, will the boat keep delivering our food? Are we going to have no food on the island? Because then we're in a pretty serious situation. And they said, no, it won't be a problem. We'll just go back to the olden days where we had to fish for the fish and we'll hunt the food and we'll forage and we'll farm. And when Corona came, they weren't at all worried about running out of food. They're pretty self-sufficient, and that was amazing to see that even on this barren island in the Arctic, they could still live pretty sustainably.
Yeah. What wildlife was on those islands?
So there were sea otters. There were lots of migratory birds that came there to nest. And then there were sea eagles flying around during the day. And one week I saw more killer whale, more orca than people, wow. Which was pretty cool. They were fishing right around the island. And so that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, so more ocean animals, not really land.
Yeah, not many land at all. Mostly bird and sea.
That would have been a crazy experience. You would have seen really cool. Northern Lights, wouldn't you?
Yes. So when I arrived and it was dark, the sun would set at 2 p.m., 3 p.m. And then, man, by 4 or 5 o'clock, the stars. I've been in a lot of dark places, but the stars in the Arctic, where the air quality is so fresh, the stars were popping. And then the Northern Lights, I saw them maybe 6 or 7 times. And the first 3 or 4 times, they were a bit anticlimactic. And then I think the 4th or 5th time I saw them, they were just absolutely jaw-dropping. Like, I couldn't go to sleep just because they were so amazing.
It's good. You said before you had basically the whole day to yourself. You only had to work 2 hours a day, was it?
Yeah. So it was a voluntary job. I wasn't paid. I got my accommodation and food. And then I had most of the day to write or do my own projects. So and when there were no guests coming, I had just a little bit of basic maintenance to do, but really not too much.
How did you find yourself getting back to where you are now?
So after my time there finished in July, and I was going to come to England, but I had nothing planned. And then a friend that I'd met in Austria 5 years ago, actually, he invited me to go and work on a children's campsite that he ran as a hiking and cycling guide. Yeah. So instead of coming home, I flew from Norway to Austria and spent 3 months hiking in the Alps there. And then I finally got home just 2 weeks ago.
Nice. That was a long 9 months.
Yeah, it was for sure. I'd only packed for 2 months in the Arctic, so I had all my winter clothes. And suddenly 9 months later, it was such a relief to get back and have shorts and all these decent clothes.
Was there a washing machine there, or did you have to hand wash all your clothes?
No, there was a washing machine, but we had to make the water from the salt water. Oh. So we had a reverse osmosis plant to make fresh water to then wash the clothes. So it was a bit of hassle.
What was your best experience being on that island?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think it was when the weather first started to improve and everyone put their boats back in the water. And it is kind of like you're waking up out of 5 months of hibernation because it's been dark. And suddenly the weather's good, the storms have finished, you can see where you are properly. And we took all these boat trips to lots of other islands and we explored seals, we hiked mountains, we went fishing. And that was just really quite an amazing experience.
What kind of lessons do you learn about yourself basically being secluded on an island for that long?
I think I became a lot more in tune with myself. There's a big difference between loneliness and solitude.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think loneliness is a very negative thing, and solitude can be a very positive thing. So even though I was on my own much of the time, I was never really lonely, but I appreciated the solitude. And so I really focused on what I wanted to do. I read a lot. I wrote a lot. It was almost meditation. I could walk around the island, and even though I'd walked it 100 times before, I was seeing the subtle changes and learning something new.
And it would be beautiful every time you walk it.
For sure.
Yeah, very, very peaceful. How much writing did you get done? You could have wrote a book in that time.
Yeah, so I am writing a book about my cycling trip, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And I did write 100,000 words. And so now I'm kind of editing that back to 80. And then I'm going to send it off to the editors.
Awesome. Can't wait for that.
Yeah, for sure. Me too.
So let's go back. Every story has a beginning. What was your upbringing like? Where are you from?
Yeah, so I'm from the south of England, about an hour away from London. I'm in a county called Kent, which is very flat and peaceful. And as a child, I'd have called it boring. And so there wasn't much opportunities to get out into the outdoors or travel. I'm from a big family of four, or a biggish family of 4 children.
Yep.
And I'm the oldest. So we didn't go on any extravagant holidays traveling around the world. But we did every year. We went for 1 or 2 weeks hiking somewhere in England. And I think looking back, that was a really formative experience, just going off and everything seems an adventure when you're that age. So we'd get lost in the mountains, we'd fall in a river or into a waterfall and have to walk back wet. And it was all part of the growing up experience. That then when I went to university, I went to a mountain area in Wales to study. And that was when I was thinking, hey, this can actually be part of my life now. I'm half an hour drive away from the mountains. And so I think it was all leading along that trajectory.
What did you study at uni?
I studied law.
Law.
I studied law, finished, and I think I've been running away from it ever since.
What made you get into that? Parental pressure or?
No, not at all. I think I finished school and I didn't really have any idea what to do. So I thought I'll do one of the hardest that I can think of. And then hopefully that will set me up for any job that I want in future. So it was kind of just keeping my options as open as possible.
That's exactly like another guy I had on. He picked the hardest degree and he doesn't even use it.
Yeah. But I think actually, I mean, I was interested in law. I found it kind of answers my curiosity, always trying to work out how things work. And so that's kind of how society works. And so I was interested in it. But I think every law student, about half the people realize towards the end of first year that they don't want to be a lawyer, that it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of stress. And so then they begin exploring other paths. And that's pretty much what I did too.
How long is the degree?
It's 3 years in England, and then you have to do another 1 year after you finish if you want to become a lawyer.
Okay. And in England, do you have to pay up front or do you get to pay it off over time?
Yeah, I'm crippled with loans.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm about
terrible, isn't it?
in debt.
It's a pretty, I owe a lot of money, but it's a pretty okay system in England in terms of you only pay once you start earning.
Yeah, that's like
so
here too.
Yeah.
I think we're on the same kind of system.
Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah, in America, stuff going to uni over there.
It cripples you. They come and take your parents' house, I think.
So once you left uni, what kind of path did you take after that?
So like I said, I decided in first year that law wasn't going to be what I wanted to do. Definitely not straight away. Maybe I'd come back to it when I was older. And it was just about that time that I stumbled onto an article about someone that had cycled around the world. And my instinct when I read the article headline was, what? You can't cycle around the world? That's impossible, isn't it? And I read deeper into the article and discovered that they actually had ridden a bike around the world. And so I read the full article. I absorbed everything I could about this guy. Read about all the amazing experiences he'd had. And this was something I'd never considered before. But within about half an hour of discovering about him, I decided that when I finished university, I was going to cycle from England to Australia.
Yeah.
And so within half an hour, I was running downstairs to tell my flatmates, guys, when I finish university, I'm going to cycle to Australia. And I thought they'd be as excited as I was, but instead they said, you're going to die. Other people do things like that, not normal people like you. And all these kind of things that basically you'll never make it. And that actually just motivated me more because now I actually wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to prove them wrong.
That's a big career change from law to cycling around the world.
Yeah, it's pretty radical.
And have you ever cycled before that, or you just decided, I'm going to start?
No, I didn't have a bike, and I hadn't really cycled at all ever. But it was just something, I can only describe it as a light bulb moment. Like everything, it seemed like the only thing I wanted from that moment on was to cycle around the world. And everything that stopped me, it just felt like an excuse. Like, I haven't cycled. That's something that can be overcome. I'm not trying to break any records. I just want to cycle around the world. It doesn't matter if it takes me 3 years or 5 years. It'll all be part of the experience and I'll get fit along the way.
So what was your first step? How did you plan this big trip?
So this was in my first year of uni, like I said. So I had 2 years to plan. So I set a date because I figured that if I didn't set a date, you can always push it further back and further back and further back. And actually it will never happen because you're never going to be totally ready for a trip like this. You can always save a bit more money. You can get a little bit more fit, whatever. So I set a date and then I wrote down a list of everything that was stopping me leaving tomorrow. So if I wanted to leave tomorrow, what do I need to do? And it's things like I don't have a bike. Okay, so I need to buy a bike. I don't have any money. Okay, so how much money do I need? I don't know how to camp in the wild for free. Okay, so what knowledge do I need to know so that I can camp in the wild for free? And I ended up with this list, probably of about 20, 25 points, maybe even more. Everything, visas, health, vaccinations, gear, all these things that were stopping me. And then just in no particular order, I began ticking them off. And then by the time my date came around, they were nearly all gone, ticked off, and I was ready to leave. And actually looking back, most of the preparations weren't essential. They gave me the confidence to leave. But then once I'd left, most of those decisions went out the window. Yeah. And I kind of winged it and gave in to the flexibility and spontaneity of the road. But I think without doing that detailed preparation, I would never have been able to leave.
Were you shit scared when that date come around for you to actually leave?
I was terrified. It still felt like the most normal thing in the world, but I had a huge party the night before. All my friends and family came. I hardly slept. And then I woke up and everyone came to the beach, which was my start line. And I just gave a hug and high-fived everyone. And then it was like, why am I doing this? Look at all these amazing friends and family that I'm leaving behind. I'm not expecting to see any of them for at least another year. And then they kind of formed a start line and said, okay, pedal. And I kind of pointed my bike east in the direction of Australia. And I thought, geez, they're 20,000 kilometers away is where I'm going. Like, how can I be so stupid and naive to think I can ride there on my bike? And I always tell people that of all the millions of pedal strokes I've done around the world, I've cycled over mountains nearly 5,000 meters high. I've cycled across amazingly vast deserts. It was those first 10 pedal strokes that were the hardest.
Oh, yeah?
Because in those first 10 pedal strokes, you went from a world where you knew where you were going to eat, what was for dinner, where you were going to sleep. You had all these things booked in your calendar. And in the space of those 10 pedal strokes, suddenly you had no idea where you were going to sleep tonight, no idea what you were going to eat, who you were going to meet. And I was so far from my comfort zone. But once that was over, everything became a lot easier.
How did you get to Australia? What countries did you have to go through? Yeah.
So I went through 33 countries on the way to Australia. So it's through Europe to Turkey, through kind of France, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, Slovenia, the Balkan countries, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Albania, Greece, Turkey. And then I went across Central Asia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, which are countries I'd never heard of when I planned this trip. Maybe you haven't heard of them.
I've only heard of Kazakhstan.
Yeah, so there's lots of small countries named after Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. They're all ex-Soviet.
They all sound the same to me.
Yeah, maybe I should speak slower. And then after I got there, my Chinese visa was denied.
Oh.
So it felt like the world had fallen around me. Like my path was blocked. I couldn't go north through Russia. I couldn't go east through China. I couldn't go south through Afghanistan. So it felt like I'd failed. And then I took a 3-day train and plane to India and resumed the trip from there. I went through India, Nepal, Burma, a lap of Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. And then I reached Australia, and I thought, if I'm going to cycle across Australia, I'm going to do it properly. So I came from Darwin to Adelaide, through the middle, and then around the coast to Sydney. Quick lap of Tassie on the way.
God, that's a long trip. How long did it take?
It was long. So I'd planned to take 1 year, and then it ended up taking 3.
Shit. God, that's long.
Yeah, it was long. It was much longer than I expected.
What was, the hardest part of it?
Hardest part?
Or the hardest terrain?
The hardest terrain, that's a different question. Because I was going to say the hardest part, it wasn't the physical.
Yeah.
It was the mental. It was to keep plowing on. When it's a very uncomfortable lifestyle, you can go several days without a shower and you're sleeping in a tent. And you just have to keep cycling, and you're eating a terrible diet of food because you can't find enough calories.
Yeah.
And it's just plowing on day after day after day. And then if you add another pressure, like a visa, time pressure, or corrupt police, or food poisoning, it's so hard just to find the motivation to keep continuing. But in terms of the hardest landscape or terrain, I'd probably have to say Central Asia. So in Tajikistan, it's kind of the foothills of the Himalayas. And it's a very bad, broken road. It's called the Pamir Highway.
Yeah.
And you got into the Pamir Mountains, and you're up above 4,000 meters for about a month. And the only food I could find were instant noodles, and occasionally I found some eggs. And so I tried to boil them. But at that height, because there's so little oxygen, it took maybe 40 minutes or an hour to boil the eggs. So you got a terrible diet. And yeah, I was so high, and I didn't realize at the time how much the altitude was affecting me. But it was only when I came down, and it felt like I was waking up out of a coma, like I could feel the oxygen getting thicker. And for the past month, I'd only been able to cycle 30 kilometers a day. I was sleeping 12 hours a night and waking up more tired. And so, yeah, that was a really hard landscape to pedal.
Yeah. What's it like going through all these countries, and I guess some of them you're the only white person through there? Do you get looked at in a negative way, or?
So I think the best part, and I kind of stumbled into this because I wasn't a cyclist when I started, but the best part about traveling by bike is that in almost all the world, if you're rich, you have a car.
Yeah.
If you're poor, you have a motorbike. And if you're very poor, you have a bicycle or walk. So people would see me cycling through their village. And I wasn't like a rich white tourist that was driving through in a Jeep or a big van. They'd see me and think, oh, look at this poor guy. He's having to cycle. He sleeps in a tent. He's got holes in his clothes and he's sweaty. And I don't look like someone that they can sell a souvenir to or exaggerate the prices. I look like someone that needs help. And so almost everywhere I went, people would welcome me with open arms, and they'd share their food. They'd invite me to stay the night. They would just want to help, and they'd be curious. They'd say, where are you cycling? And I'd say, Australia, and I've cycled from London. And those distances were kind of too big for them to understand often. And so then they'd say, okay, where are you cycling today? And you'd say the next town, 25 kilometers away. And they'd say, today on a bicycle there? You can cycle from here to there on a bicycle? And so it just blew their mind what you were doing. You generally get a welcome that you were Superman, but also that you needed help.
Yeah. So you felt safe?
Yeah, I had very few problems throughout the trip. I've got a quick statistic that I can give.
Yeah.
That of the three-year trip, I never really paid for hotels or campsites or accommodation because I didn't have the money. So I went out prepared to wild camp. But 60% of the time, nearly 600 nights, I was invited by total strangers to stay with them for free. Wow. 60% of the time, someone would drag me off the street. I'll say, hey, where are you sleeping tonight? And I'd say, I'll cycle another 10 kilometers and then set up my tent. And they'd say, tent? I have a spare room. And through that, I met all kinds of walks of life and just the most amazing people. And, when I'd left on this trip, I thought the highlights were going to be the mountains, the waterfalls, the deserts, the landscapes. But I realized very, very quickly that the highlights were the people. Everyone's got a story. And so I really slowed down and started learning their story. And if someone offered me a cup of tea at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'll accept it, even though I've only just started cycling. And maybe I'll stay the night. I had a very flexible, no time pressure trip.
That's awesome that people that don't know you treat you so well and bring you into their home.
It was utterly amazing. And I never got used to it. I always thought, I've got so much luck that surely something bad's going to happen. And so I never got used to people dragging me into the house and feeding me their food.
And I guess you're going through villages where people don't have much money, and it must be weird seeing kids with smiles on their faces and they're so happy, but at the same time, they don't have anything really.
You cut out. But I heard the question. I never really got you. I don't really like this cliche of like the happy, poor, because I think I don't like it, and I can't really work out why. But there was definitely something in terms of priorities. They had much closer family links, much closer friends. They didn't have the same work stress. They definitely had a different work-life balance to what I've experienced in England and even in Australia and America. And they absolutely were so much less attached to what they did have. And they were so generous. And yeah, it was really amazing to see. So I was in places where people would give me their food and then not be able to eat. And you'd be eating and they're like, oh, is it delicious? And there's no selfish motive. And eventually I had to say, no, come on, let's share. Or they'd invite me to eat with them. And I'd say, I'm not very hungry, even though I was starving, just because I couldn't bear for them to give me their food.
Yeah. It must make you feel so grateful for what you have back home.
Absolutely. Yeah, you cannot, once you do a trip like this, you cannot take anything for granted again.
Yeah, it would really open up your eyes.
Yeah.
I feel like
it changes who you are. It's more than eye-opening. It changes who you are. It changes what you think you need. It changes who you think you are, and it changes your priorities.
Yeah, especially in today's society where people are unhappy, but they got so much compared to some of these other people. It's like, come on, man. If only you opened your eyes and you traveled to some of these places and seen how these other people live, like you'd change your perspective on life.
You're absolutely spot on, dude. The first thing that happened when I came back to England after this trip was I opened my wardrobe and I had a whole wardrobe of so many clothes. And it seemed obscene. It seemed so extravagant, because why did I need so many clothes when I'd lived for 3 years with 2 pairs?
Yeah.
And even now, like the thought of accumulating all this stuff, there's a much more valuable thing to accumulate, which is experience and friends. And yeah, it's really eye-opening.
What was your favorite country to travel through?
Oh, my favorite country, your people's favorite country is always down to a very personal experience for them. If you meet good people, you love the country. If you have 1 or 2 bad experiences, you hate the country. So my favorite country is India.
Yeah.
And that's for a few reasons. It's partly because it's so big and there's so much diversity. You know, every state, I think there's 28 or 30 states. Every state speaks a different language, different food, different culture. They wear different clothes. They do different kinds of dance. They have different festivals. And so as a traveler, it is so exciting to never really understand what's happening around you. Like every 3 or 4 days, suddenly everything changes and you have to get used to everything again. And you're just there wondering how things are working. And so I really liked it for that reason. But the other reason is that I became something of a celebrity in India. I'd been given school talks across my trip, and I gave 2 school talks in India, and it kind of spiraled from there. So then I was passed on from one school to the next, and I was staying with head teachers every night. And then I was interviewed for a newspaper, a big national newspaper, and then I was interviewed for a television channel, and suddenly it felt like everyone has heard my name. And I had this WhatsApp group with lots of people in that want to help me out. And so I was in India a total of 4 months. And every single night I slept in a house of total strangers. And I stayed real diversity. I stayed with millionaires. I stayed with a rocket scientist and launched a rocket into space.
Oh, wow.
I stayed with poor farmers and I had to kind of huddle around a pile of crops. I had a phone call with the Prince of Bhutan, the neighboring country. And he was like, "Oh, I just want to see if you're coming to my country."
Did you go?
And then, no, I couldn't in the end, but that's for another reason. But I've met him in Thailand.
Okay.
And he's a really nice guy, so we're planning to go. And then at the Nepalese border, I was welcomed by the district president of the Communist Party and went back and spent the night in his hotel. So all these kind of crazy experiences. And like I said, I'm really interested in people-focused travel. So just to have all these experiences.
Yeah, that would have been crazy. Celebrity. God.
Yeah, for sure.
What was it like, I guess, staying with people of such high status in those countries?
Well, I think that's another thing that I'd kind of learned on this trip was that people are people. And when someone invited me to the house, it was never about having a bed to stay or having free food or having a shower. Like those things, I didn't really value those things. Like I'd have been just as happy in my tent. But the real thing was the person I got to meet. But I found that the people of high status, I could learn a lesson from them. But I could learn a valuable lesson also from a farmer or from a taxi driver driving a tuk-tuk. And so it really wasn't, apart from a little boost for the ego, like I'm staying with a rocket scientist and we're launching a rocket into space and it makes a good story. I really kind of just thought of people as people, and it was just as cool to stay with anyone.
That's amazing. Did you video this tour at all or no?
I've got a few videos, but I've not made them into a big YouTube thing yet, but I'd really like to.
That would be awesome. I'll definitely watch that.
Yeah, I'll share it with you when it's up.
Yeah, man. So when you got to Australia, so you went from Darwin to Adelaide, straight through the middle. That would have been torturous.
Yeah, that was really hard. I met an English girl in Catherine who'd also cycled from England to Australia. And we'd left pretty much the same time in 2015, 3 years earlier. And we'd taken very similar routes and we'd crossed paths, but never heard of each other. And I met her in Catherine and she said, "Where are you cycling?" And I said, "Sydney." And she said, "No way, me too." So we cycled all the way from Catherine to Adelaide together. So at least I had a buddy to cycle with. I think this was October, November. So it was really starting to get hot. And yeah, it was a very different challenge to what I had before. Asia was very crowded on the whole. And so the challenges were people and finding places to camp, where it was a very different mental challenge in the outback, just to keep having the motivation to continue when the road might not bend, when it's 3 days until the next place for you to top up water. But I absolutely found a beauty in the outback that I hadn't expected. It was so calm and peaceful and just like meditation. And then we could roll off the road at 7 o'clock when the sun set, and the stars were incredible.
That's crazy. Well, I read on your vlog, was it 3,000 kilometers from Darwin to Adelaide?
I think it might be a bit more. I think it's 3,000 on the Stuart Highway.
Okay.
But we swung out to Uluru.
Yep.
And we also did the Oodnadatta track. So I think it might have been nearer 4,000.
God, that is crazy.
Yeah, it was 2 months from sea to sea.
Wow.
And when I was up in the Adelaide Hills, when I first saw the coast again, just shimmering in the distance, and after all that miles of sand and desert, it was genuinely one of the most beautiful things I'd seen. And I've got a video of that, just seeing the sea, bursting into tears. And it was kind of the end of the challenge.
How tough would it be to cycle through the desert, basically, because it's all sand?
Yeah, so there is a paved route, which is the Stuart Highway. And that's kind of just an endurance challenge. But the way we went out to Oodnadatta and the Kings Canyon Loop, that is off-road and it's really corrugated. And so that automatically cuts down the distance you can do each day a lot more. And it also makes you a lot more vulnerable and isolated. So I don't know how many cars were passing me on the Stuart Highway each day, but quite a lot. But when we went out onto the Oodnadatta, it could have been less than 10 cars every day that were passing me. And so if you do have a problem, it's quite serious.
Yeah.
And it wasn't possible to be in the sun between 10 o'clock and 5 o'clock. It was just too hot. So somehow we had to find shade. I remember speaking to a guy in Alice Springs, and he said, "You're going to die." And I said, no, maybe we just find a tree to shade under. And he said, if you see a tree out there, take a photo, put it on Facebook and let me know. I was like, oh man, because there really is nothing. So every day we'd have to tie like a blanket from our bike down into the sand or onto a fence and just lay under it for 7 hours. And it was too hot to eat or sleep or read, do anything but just to lay there. And we had 25 liters of water because it was 3 days to the next place to fill up. And you're just watching that go down. And in that 7 hours, you need to still drink 2 or 3 liters, and you're not making any forward progress. And so, yeah, it felt really quite vulnerable and isolated and quite scary. I used to lay there sweating and think of my mum waking up on a winter's England morning and it's kind of 0 degrees. Yeah. And she'd look out the window and think, oh, that's a nice sunrise. But literally on the other side of the world, the same sun is slowly killing me.
Yeah. Wow. It would have been a shit ton of flies too.
Nothing. Just that word is making me feel uncomfortable. Nothing has ever made me as angry in my life as the Australian flies.
Yep.
They are the worst thing of the whole trip, in my opinion. And yeah, the only thing I was glad was having Jamie, the English girl, cycling with me, because at least there was someone else suffering as much as me. She said the same. She said the only thing that is making it easier for me is seeing how bad a time you are having. But yeah, you constantly had flies in your eyes, in your nose, in your mouth. And when you were eating your porridge in the morning, you'd have to have the lid on your pot, take it off, dip the spoon in, put the lid back on, pull your buff down so you could eat, put the spoon in, pull the buff back up. And that's for every spoonful.
Yep.
And even then you've swallowed a fly that flew onto your spoon and there's 2 more drowning in your pot. Yep. There was just absolutely no escape.
Welcome to Australia.
Yeah, Australia, mate.
All I can say is you're lucky that you had someone else with you. It would have driven you crazy just doing it by yourself.
I cannot imagine. I always say the road always provides. Like, there were so many things that happened on the trip that it almost makes you superstitious or spiritual. Just because how did the road know that that's what I needed at the time? And Jamie is definitely an example of that. Like, if I hadn't met her in Sydney, in Catherine, it would have been a totally different experience. and definitely much harder.
Did you like hallucinate at any times? Because it's just the same thing for however ever long.
I wouldn't call it hallucination, but there were some real funky mirages.
Yeah.
We had hours where we were trying to work out if the road was going up. She'd think the road was going uphill, and I'd think the road was going downhill. And you just can't see because the road is dead straight and there's no reference point.
Yeah.
And you'd think there was water in the road, and you'd think, oh, that roadhouse is 5 kilometers away. And an hour later, you're still up there. So everything kind of plays with your mind.
Is there any wildlife out there?
Yeah, Australia was one of the best countries for wildlife because it is so empty. I was so amazed.
It'd more so be reptiles, would it?
Yeah, there were reptiles, lizards, snakes, amazing birds.
Yeah.
Amazing birds of prey, kind of feasting on the roadkill. I saw camels. I saw kangaroos, dingoes. Yeah, it was amazing. And you have these huge, what are they called? The huge farm properties.
Yeah.
Like I went past Anna Creek Station, which I think is the same size as Wales.
Yeah.
And it took us a week to cycle across it. And that's just one farm property ran by 7 people.
Yeah.
And they herd the cows with helicopters. And more or less when they finish rounding them up, they then have to start again for the next year.
Yeah.
The mustering. So it's the scale of it is, as an Englishman, we can't understand it.
Yeah, it's crazy thinking how big this country is, eh?
Yeah, the scale of it is huge.
So when you reached Adelaide, did you go straight to Sydney or did you stay in Adelaide for a bit?
Yeah, I had a friend in Adelaide.
Yeah.
So I stayed with him, but I really needed some time to recover. So I think I probably stayed a week at least and didn't really move. I was so exhausted mentally and physically. And so, yeah, I stayed there, hung up with him. And then I'd agreed to meet a friend in Tassie for Christmas. So I had to power along the Great Ocean Road, do a lap of Tassie, and then spent Christmas in Launceston.
Nice. And then you finally got to Sydney after that.
Yeah, got to Sydney just after New Year's.
And you didn't even come to the Blue Mountains, mate.
No, I really missed out there. I had a job waiting for me up on the Gold Coast. So I pretty much went straight from Sydney to Queensland and then spent the next 6 months there.
What job were you doing in Queensland?
I was labouring.
Okay, yeah.
Just saving some money for the next trip.
Yeah. And then did you go you sailed to South Africa after that, didn't you?
Yeah, so on the cycling trip, I'd always planned to use as little planes or no planes if possible. And I had to use one after my Chinese visa was denied. And then I reached Singapore, which had always been the end of the trip. And I wanted to sail or arrive in Australia by boat if it was possible. So in Singapore, I'd gone and spoken to the cargo ship men. I'd messaged ship captains to see if anyone was sailing. And it was the wrong time of year and no one was sailing. So eventually I went across Indonesia and flew to Australia. But a year later, when I'm in Gold Coast, just by chance, one of the sailing captains messaged me and he said, "Hey, are you still looking for a boat to sail with? I'm in Australia and I need to sail home to South Africa. Do you want to come with me?" And I think my visa finished 2 weeks later and I hadn't really decided what I was going to do. So I just immediately said yes. It was exactly the same as the bike trip. I'd never sailed before. There were so many reasons why it was not an ideal thing to do, but it turned into another incredible trip.
And back on cycling for Australia, what was the biggest lesson you learned about yourself there?
Biggest lesson? I think it's just that I was stronger than I thought.
Yeah.
Like just the confidence to keep going and going and going. It was a really introspective time. And I think it was also a time for reflecting on the overall trip. There'd been so much that had happened in the past 2 years through Asia that I hadn't been able to process it at the time. And a lot of the realizations that I had from the trip came in the Australian outback. Kind of all these things that I'm talking about the kindness of strangers, my priorities in life.
Yeah.
These are things that I'd been exposed to in Asia, but I only had the time to actually learn them in the quiet peace of Australia.
You had plenty of time.
So much time. By the time I neared Adelaide, like a week it took 2 months to cycle across the outback, and very little changed in that time. Like you see Uluru, you see desert, and that's pretty much it for 2 months. And I think about 2 weeks before I reached Adelaide, my mind had just thought of everything it was possible to think about. It had thought everything 100 times over. And I needed something new. I needed new stimulus. I needed some new experience to think about. And I was going crazy just thinking over the same things I've thought about 100 times. So yeah, you have a lot of thinking time cycling across Australia.
And what was your favorite part of that?
The favorite part of Australia?
Cycling through it.
I think it was the night skies.
Yeah.
When the heat of the day finished, when it cooled down about 7 or 8 o'clock, occasionally we'd cycle an hour through the darkness. And the road is so straight, and you know, we didn't have lights on our bike. But if there's a car coming towards you, you'll see it 20 minutes before it actually arrives, because the roads is so straight. And yeah, then we'd set up tents. You can literally just pull off the road, set your tent in the warm sand, and then lay in the road, which is still warm from the heat of the sun, and stare up at the stars. And I swear there were so many. You know, I met an Aboriginal person who said they navigate using the black bits between the stars.
Okay.
So whereas we have the Southern Cross, they have the giant emu, which is the place where there aren't any stars.
Ah.
That just blew my mind.
That's interesting.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Was there any like tribes out there? I don't know. I live in Australia. I don't even know this.
Yeah, but I think a lot of I can't remember what they're called, the towns are kind of closed off so that they can live. It's kind of hard to get entry so that they can continue living their lifestyle.
Okay.
And it's harder for tourists to visit.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't too much exposure. I met them in Darwin and Alice Springs. But living their authentic life, or how they'd lived the traditional life, I didn't have much exposure. But I'm in Arnhem Land near Darwin. Yeah. There's lots of settlements there.
Mm. So what's better, the Australian night sky or the Norway night sky?
Oh. Well, you don't have the Northern Lights.
Yes, true.
I think for stars, you win. I think for stars, I've never seen anywhere like Australia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure. Even on the boat, when I was sailing, there were times where I was 1,000 miles from land. And so there's no light pollution at all. But the stars were still better in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
The air quality, the air is so dry that there's like nothing in the atmosphere to protect it.
Mm.
So that was really incredible.
Yeah, it is. I remember, like, I'm so used to like seeing the stars in the sky, and I went to China and you see nothing.
Yeah.
It's just pollution.
Yeah, it's like a halo, like a dome of light over you.
It's crazy. Now, sailing, what was that experience like? Since you've never done it before, you had to learn it all. Was it just you and one guy?
It was me and two South Africans. One of them was a guy called Vin, and he was 63 years old, and he'd been sailing around the world for the last 2 years. So he'd left South Africa in 2016, and he'd gone across to Brazil, across South America, across the Pacific Ocean, and then across the Atlantic to New Zealand, and he picked me up in Australia. So I was joining him for his final leg back to South Africa, which was amazing. And then the other guy was a South African guy that had just come out for this crossing. So he flew to Darwin and sailed back. And I was the only one that had never sailed before. And there were times where it was the most terrified I've ever been in my life, where I was certain we were going to die. We had some huge storms. And I think sometimes the nearest people that we knew about were on the International Space Station, like buzzing over you, 250 kilometers above you. And then there were times it was just so peaceful and the sea was so flat and you could swim in the water and it's kilometers deep and so clear. And we stopped at 5 islands on the way, and they were really some of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life.
That is awesome. Did you get to like swim with like sea turtles?
Yeah, so the coolest thing we did, there's a reef 800 kilometers off the coast of Australia called Ashmore Reef.
Yep.
And you've heard of it?
No, I haven't actually.
No, it's Australian territory. And it's about 1 kilometer long, 200 meters wide. And it's literally sand, maybe 3 meters above sea level, with one palm tree on it. And it's surrounded by 10 kilometers of shallow reef. So as we sailed up to it, I said to the captain, do you need any help sailing, or is it all under control? And he said, yeah, I'm fine. So I tied a rope to the back of the boat, and then I tied a kind of surfboard or bodyboard to the back of that rope and jumped in the water. And as the boat's sailing, kind of 4 or 5 kilometers an hour, I could jump in the water with a mask and snorkel and steer through the water.
Oh, that's cool.
Using this bodyboard, I could dive down. I could pop out the water like a dolphin jumping. And it was just like a safari being dragged behind this boat. And we saw turtles and manta ray and shark and dolphins and coral and reefs that were alive with fish. And that was really, really amazing. Like the sea was so full of life.
That is amazing. From talking to you, it's crazy how you kind of know so much more about my own country than I do.
I think that's often the case. I'm sure there's tourists that have been to England that know much more about London.
Yeah.
Because it's on my doorstep.
Yeah.
And so I've never really approached it with the mindset of a traveller.
Yeah, I need to get out more.
Yeah, for sure. We all do.
So you reached South Africa. What was your next kind of move there?
I cycled across South Africa.
Yep.
So I was planning on cycling from South Africa back to England, but my passport was full. I couldn't enter another country, so I decided I'll cycle to Cape Town and fly back to England from there. So I spent 2 months cycling across South Africa.
Awesome. And on the sailing, what was it like being stuck on that boat with 2 guys for how long did it take?
It took 3 months.
3 months. So 3 months with 2 guys. Did you have any clashes or?
So the boat was 11 meters long.
Yep.
So for 3 months, that was, apart from when we were on the island, that was as far away as you could get from each other. And so you really did have to get on. And after my cycling trip, where I'd been totally solo, it was a really amazing experience to be part of a team. And, I'm doing the night watch, so then they can do the day watch. And you really had to cooperate. I got on with both of them a lot better than they got on with each other.
Oh, really?
So from one of the islands, one of the guys flew home.
Oh, really?
Me and Vin, the captain. And I'd kind of been like the peacemaker up until that point. So there were tensions. There always are in that small space.
Yeah.
But there was nothing really, really severe. And it was kind of special to share that with someone, particularly after my solo cycling trip, to go through this experience with someone else. And we still talk about it now. Do you remember that time that you did this? Or do you remember that time I pushed you overboard? Or all these crazy experiences that we shared, we can reflect on together.
Yeah.
And so I liked it being a team trip.
What's some of the best stories from that trip?
Some of the best stories. There was a lot of banter all the way throughout, lots of pranks, climbing in. Best stories. There was one storm. I was the only person that hadn't sailed. And they were laughing at me the whole time. And then it got really serious, the storm, and the waves just picked up. And even the captain started to be a bit scared. And he was saying, I thought that wave was going to capsize us. He got the satellite phone ready in case we had to call for help. And we're 1,000 kilometers off the coast of anywhere. So you really are on your own. And it was the most scared I've ever been in my life. The waves were bigger than a house. And I went and laid in my bed. And it felt like a coffin. And I had this escape hatch above my bed with glass where I could see out. And I was trying to think, if the boat tips upside down, like everything will be the other way around. How do I get out? Which way do I need to swim? Which way do I need to open the hatch if we're underwater? And it was just too scary for me. And this lasted for hours. So calmly packed a bag with everything, all my valuables, kind of laptop, phone, passport, in a waterproof bag. And I just sat on the deck next to the life raft. And I figured, you know, when we capsize, it wasn't if we capsize, it was when we capsize, I'm going to be the first one on this life raft. And I'm going to survive with all my valuables. But then we'll probably have to spend 3 or 4 days in the life raft until a boat can reroute and come and find us.
Yeah.
So it was of course, the boat didn't capsize and it pulled through and we were all able to laugh about it. But it was just a terrifying experience. And then we had a second storm just before we reached South Africa. And the boat completely broke. The rudder snapped, so we couldn't really steer properly. And so we had to fix it with chopping board and anchor chain and driftwood. So we've got this botched, like rubbishy rudder. We can hardly steer. One of our sails ripped. One of the lines ripped. Both engines got salt water in the engines and overheated. The batteries went flat. So we are in such a terrible situation, just 1 kilometer, just one day from South Africa. And the captain had messaged his brother about our situation, and he'd arranged for South African Coast Guard to come and tow us to land. And they were radioing us, can we come and save you? Can we come and save you? And he was saying, no, I've sailed around the world, damn it. I'm not being towed in the last 60 miles. And I was completely behind him. I didn't want to be towed in the last 60 miles of our ocean crossing.
Yeah.
So we limped to South Africa. And we had to phone them every hour to tell them, you know, we're still okay. We don't need you to save us yet. And then as we got closer, it was a really busy shipping port with huge cargo ships pulling in and out. And so we had to almost zigzag across the channel, almost holding the sail because it had ripped. And yeah, eventually we made it at about 1 a.m. And the whole Coast Guard were on the lines of the harbour, clapping and waving. Their boat had been lowered in the water, ready to come and save us. And it just felt like the most relief you can imagine, that we'd survived, that we'd made it. Wow. And yeah, it was time for my new adventure, cycling.
Lucky you didn't get seasick. I get the worst seasickness. I'd be spewing up.
Yeah, I do find that you get used to seasickness. So I was often seasick for the first 3 days after leaving land, which it is the worst. You're spewing everywhere and it sucks and you can't concentrate on anything. And I mean, I got really good at cooking food because I was one of the chefs. With the boat moving, feeling seasick, you're having to hold the pan and rotate it over the cooker. But then after 3 days, you do get used to it. And actually then when you go back to land, you get a bit land sick and you're sitting down and it feels like the whole room is moving.
What did you eat? Did you stock up on food in Australia?
Yeah, we had loads. We filled the tanks with 900 litres of water and food to last pretty much the whole crossing. And then we supplemented that with fish we caught.
Awesome. And you would have had extra food since that guy left too.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So then,
but it was a very fishy diet. I think towards the end we were having fish, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and my body was almost rejecting it. Like the thought of fish for several months after just reminded me of the seasickness, reminded me of being on the boat, and I just couldn't get it down.
No, and it's not the best smelling thing either. No way. And when you catch one and you have to gut it, the whole boat stinks for a long time after. No. So you got to South Africa, then you cycled around there. Did you say you caught a plane home?
Yeah, I had to get a new passport. So I caught a plane from South Africa to England just to get a new passport. But then while I was in England, I got offered a job that I couldn't turn down as a writer for a hiking company. So I ended up not going back to South Africa. But that's still my dream, hopefully when Corona's over, to cycle from England to Cape Town.
Yeah, nice. And when you got back to England, how long have you been away for?
3 years.
3 years.
3.5 years, yeah.
God, that is a long time.
It is a long time. I'd flown home once in that time from Australia. After I finished, I flew home just for a month, not even a month, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing to get home.
How long ago was all this happening?
2018, I finished in Sydney. End of 2018, I finished in South Africa. Or
Okay.
2019. So it's only a year ago that I finished all this.
Yep.
A year and a half.
And what did you do all of last year?
So last year I was writing for a hiking company.
Yep.
So it's amazing. I mean, all these fears that I had when I first started the cycling trip and about going back to law, it's amazing the way that doors have just opened every step of the way, like Norway, like this hiking camp in Austria that I worked at recently. But one of them was working for a hiking magazine. So they sent me to a different country every week to complete a hike and then write an article about it. And so that was what I was doing last year. It was just an amazing opportunity to explore. It was only based in Europe.
Yeah.
So to go to all these countries that are on my doorstep, and particularly in England, that I've never been to, and really explore.
So you've cycled nearly most of the world, and then COVID stuffed that up. You can't really complete it at the moment. So,
so all these doors that have opened across my trip have now closed.
Yes.
So that's been pretty challenging.
So as soon as kind of COVID goes away and the world opens up, you're going to be straight back out there?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I've got so many trips and dreams that I'm always planning of. But I think the big one I want to do is cycle the 6 continents. So I've cycled Europe, Asia, Australia.
Yeah.
I'd love to do England to Cape Town and then Alaska to South America. That's kind of a lifetime ambition. And that's just because I think a bicycle is probably one of the best ways to travel and to meet people.
Yeah. And when the world opens up, where do you think your first destination will be?
I think it will be England to Cape Town.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah.
How many kilometers is that?
It depends how much I zigzag. I'd expect to take maybe 1.5, 2 years. And I guess it'll be at least 20,000.
Yeah.
And it might be that I end up doing something like down the East Coast, back up the West Coast. So starting and finishing in London.
Yeah.
And making it a circular trip. But the logistics of the West Coast are quite a bit harder than the East Coast. So something to consider.
Yeah. I've been thinking, when you're traveling, how do you go about, I guess, 1, navigation, and 2, the language barriers?
Okay, the first question, navigation. So there's lots of the part of the world where there isn't the density of roads. It's like when I was in Australia, there's one road through the center.
Yeah.
And when I was in Central Asia, there's one road for 5,000 kilometers pretty much. And so it isn't so hard to navigate. You can almost follow the sun. And then the rest I used Maps.me, which is a phone app where you can download for offline.
Yep.
And that's really, I found it quite accurate around the world. And you just need some way to keep your phone charged up, a power bank or a solar panel. And then you've basically got the whole world saved onto your phone, which is really amazing. But I think the other thing is that it never has really mattered on any of my trips where I am, as long as I'm going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So there's not really a specific road that I want to be on. I almost could just follow using the sun, and that would be fine. So sometimes I just ask locals every day, I want to go to this town. Shall I go this road or this road? Which is the most beautiful? Shall I take the mountains or shall I take the coast? Because locals know better than I do. Locals know better than the internet.
Yeah.
Because they've driven it, they've lived there their whole lives. And so, yeah, it's only by talking to locals. And then you'll hear things like, go this way because my sister's getting married there next week and you can come and visit. Or go this way because there's a big festival in that town. And so you hear things that you'd never be able to research. And I kind of like that it's not me making the decision. You can just give up all your responsibility and say, you decide for me, which way shall I cycle? And that can be as much thought as goes into it. And in terms of language barriers, I've had a language barrier pretty much from England until I arrived in Australia. Australia was the first English-speaking country, official English-speaking country, since leaving home. But it's amazing how much you can communicate with your hands. I mean, you can easily say, I'm hungry, I need somewhere to sleep, I'm tired. Which way shall I go, this way or this way? But if you meet someone that is interested in talking and patient, you can talk about so much. I've had conversations about circumcision with a baker in Uzbekistan. And he's pointing at me like, are you and like swiping with his hand an imaginary penis. And I'm like, oh, no. Are you? And then he pulls down his son's trousers. And he's like, are you like this? And I was like, oh, in Christian countries, this, no. And he's like, oh, in Muslim countries, this, yes. And so just using your hands, it's amazing what you can talk about. And there's also universal languages. Everyone around the world knows the language of laughter. I say there's 3 universal languages. There's laughter, there's dance, and there's football. Anywhere around the world, you can communicate with those. And just, it's amazing what friendships you can make quickly through any of those 3.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When I got to Australia, I'd been spending so long in talking with my hands. I even do it now. I can see myself in this video. That I couldn't speak not using my hands. So I'd be in Darwin and I'd say, I would like 4 bananas. And I'd hold up 4 fingers. And then they'd say, okay. And then I'd say, and I'd like 3 apples. And I'd hold up 3 fingers. And they were like, okay, I speak English. And there was about 2 weeks where I couldn't say a number without holding up the same number of fingers. So when people asked how old I was, I'd say, I am 25. And you? And everything was accompanied with a gesture with my hands.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, okay, are you really stupid? And it was a very strange habit that I just couldn't control for a couple of weeks after at first.
Mm. Was there any dangerous parts of the trips or any dangerous encounters with people or wildlife?
So there weren't too many, I'm sorry to say, because this is always the exciting part. There were a few stories. Obviously, the sailing was dangerous in terms of the storms. The roads were dangerous in terms of the traffic, particularly coming through the outback. The size of those road trains, as they fly meet like less than a meter from you, is absolutely terrifying. But in terms of exciting, like scary moments to hear about, I was arrested twice by corrupt policemen.
In what country?
So they were 3 days apart. One was in Uzbekistan and the next was in Tajikistan. So in Uzbekistan, I got arrested. You have to, because the country is a dictatorship, you have to stay in a hotel every 3 nights. And then the hotel will register you and the government can kind of follow your progress, where you've been in the country, almost to check you're not a spy or just to check what you're doing. But the country is mostly desert. So there were days and days and days with no villages and no hotel. So I had all these gaps in my registration. And eventually I got arrested by the police who said, we don't know where you've been. And they were obviously very suspicious of me. And so this time, because I'd done something wrong, I flattered them. And I got out photos of the country that I'd taken. And I said, oh, Uzbekistan is the most beautiful country in the world. I've never seen desert like it. Uzbek policemen are the most handsome policemen in the world. Look at your uniform. And they really kind of were flattered by it and eventually let me go, which was quite lucky because that could have been, I could have been deported for not following the visa regulations. And then 3 days later, I've just entered Tajikistan, the next country, and I'm just walking along the street buying a watermelon and I get arrested again just for not having my passport with me, because I'd left it in my room, which is kind of a fixed, phony crime. And I'm protesting, like, this is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. Really getting argumentative this time because I can tell that they're looking for a bribe. Mm. And then one of them says to me, if you give us $30, we can let you go. And so now I knew that they were just corrupt and wanted money. And so I sat down on the street, on the floor, refused to move. And I thought they wouldn't touch me because I hadn't done anything wrong. And they get really angry. They're punching their fists. They're showing me their guns. And eventually they pick me up and throw me in a police van and drive me to the police station. And even there they say, okay, if you give us $30, we let you go. And of course, I was on a $4 or $5 budget a day.
Yeah.
So $30 is a week. And so I said, I'm not paying $30. That's a huge amount of money. I'm not paying anything. I've done nothing wrong. And they start getting more angry. And I say, I'll stay here. There's a bed, there's a toilet, there's a shower. It's like a free hotel. What's the Wi-Fi password? And they're like, no Wi-Fi. And then I said, what's for breakfast? Can I have my eggs like sunny side up? And they were like, no, give us $30 and you can go. And so I bluffed, and eventually they realized I wasn't going to give the $30, and they let me go. So that was the 2 times I got arrested. I feel like there was one other scary story, but I can't think of it right now.
That's all right.
I'm sure it'll come back to me. I'll let you know.
All right. When you're traveling, what kind of basic equipment are you taking with you?
So it really was very basic. Everything was designed that nothing looks flashy. I've obviously got the bike, which is quite cheap and basic, so that if it breaks anywhere around the world, it can be fixed. So there's nothing high tech about it. And then I had 4 bags, and in one bag was my clothes, and I pretty much had 2 pairs. In another bag was my cooking stuff. So I had a petrol stove so that I could cook all my food, and there were pots and pans. In another bag, there was a first aid kit and bike repair gear. And I had a water filter so that I could filter the water in that bag. And all the bike spare parts. And then in the other bag, I had my camping stuff. And the only really high-tech things I had a solar panel to keep everything charged, and a water filter so that I could drink water from anywhere. Yeah. But there really wasn't any tent. There was nothing too high-tech in there. It weighed about 50 kilos. My bike was 20, and then my gear was 30. I was taking photos throughout the whole trip. So I had a camera, 3 lenses, actually. So that was quite heavy. Yeah. And then a laptop to edit the photos. But
you said you're on $3 or $4 budget a day. How much did you actually spend throughout that whole trip?
So it's quite crazy. The whole 3-year trip cost less than 5,000 Oz dollars.
Wow.
I think for 3 years. It was an insane budget. That's everything. That's visas, that's bike repair, that's food, that's accommodation. When you travel, you pretty much have 3 costs. There's the transport, which for me was a bike. Yeah. So I didn't have any flights I only had the 2 flights I spoke about. And the bike was free to cycle with a bit of bike repair. You have your accommodation costs, which for me were free because I was camping or staying with locals. And then you have your food budget, which was really my only expense for most of the trip. And you can live for £3 or £4 a day anywhere in the world. And it was kind of my quality of life that changed. So in Thailand or India, I could live like a king. Yeah. For £4 enough a day, I could eat in a restaurant for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But in Australia, I could still live for £4 a day. But that meant having porridge for breakfast and then pasta with a tin of tuna for lunch and dinner. So it's just the quality of life that shifted a lot.
And over that whole trip, what was the biggest lesson you learned about yourself?
I think it was how little I need. It was my priorities. It was what makes me happy. It's not stuff. It's not status. It's experiences and friends that are what make me happy. And that's been a really valuable lesson. Every decision that I've made since then has continued to build on that. So that when I went to this island in Norway and I'm not getting paid, and people are saying, you're not getting any money, that's crazy. But the value of spending months on this Norwegian island and having the time to reflect and the time to write and read and the time to make these really deep connections with these people that live there, that was payment enough for me.
Yeah. And when you're traveling, how much weight did you actually lose, or did you kind of maintain?
Yeah, so I kind of ate like a camel. Yeah. So there were times of feast and times of famine. So in India, for example, where I was staying with all these people, and they all wanted to give me food, and the food was really cheap and really good, I actually put on weight, and I went up to maybe 85 kilos. And I actually, put on a lot of weight. But then when I was in Central Asia, and it's exhausting cycling, and the only food I could find was instant noodles, I think the lowest I went down to was about 65.
Wow, that's a big
So
difference.
my weight it kind of fluctuated by about 20 kilos across the trip. So
Wow.
huge variation.
Did you feel like crap when you were that low of a weight?
Yeah, absolutely. It took a long time after that month in the mountains in Tajikistan, I had arranged to stay with a guy for one night, a guy called Talibek. And my phone is running out of battery. He was a 65-year-old scientist.
Yep.
And I'd arranged to stay one night. And when he saw how exhausted I was, he just said, okay, you can stay longer. And by chance, we got on very, very well. He was a really nice guy. And so I ended up staying with him for 2 months, just with one guy. And pretty much the first 2 or 3 weeks of that was just recovering. I couldn't move very much. He'd have to send me to bed after I'd had breakfast, wake me up at lunch, send me to bed after lunch, wake me up for dinner. And it was just what I needed at that time.
God. For any listeners out there who want to travel the way you travel, what are some tips you could give them?
I'd say it's a lot simpler than it sounds, maybe. When you're out there, so when you're sitting back at home, you have all these questions and people are asking you all these questions, like what will you do if your bike breaks in the desert? How are you going to find food? How are you going to find somewhere to sleep? But when you're out there, these are just a series of common sense decisions. Like suddenly they're not hypothetical questions when you're sitting at home. They're actual realities that you need to solve. And there's always a very simple way out. So if your bike breaks, my bike broke in 2 deserts. It broke in Uzbekistan and it broke in Australia. In one, I managed to kind of fix it enough to keep cycling to the next bike shop. And in the other, I had to hitchhike back 200 kilometers back to the Alice Springs to a bike shop and then hitchhike back. So all these things that seem very scary now are actually very simple. So I'd suggest doing what I did, which is write down everything that's stopping you leaving tomorrow and then just go and do it. And everything will flow into place. The road really, you'll become superstitious because the road will give you everything you need at the right time.
Yeah.
And the things that go wrong will become part of the experience along the way, part of the story you tell about your trip. If everything went to plan, it would be a very dull trip in a way.
It's crazy how so many people make up excuses as to why they can't do it. But when you for instance, you made this list and then you realized half of it was you didn't really need, wasn't an issue really when you first set out.
Yeah, I think it's completely natural to make excuses because we're kind of programmed to make excuses. We're told you can't do this, you can't do that. But then if you want something enough, those excuses suddenly become obstacles. Like when I'd read about this guy cycling around the world, I wanted it so much that the fact I didn't have any money wasn't a reason not to do it. Well, it wasn't an excuse. It was just something that I had to overcome to make it worthwhile. Yeah. So sure, have these excuses and realize that they're excuses and that they're stopping you doing it. But don't let that be a reason to say no. Work out, okay, I've got this excuse, but what can I do to get rid of that excuse?
Yeah, exactly. Now, when you're not traveling, do you have any hobbies?
I love outdoor sports. I love keeping active. And so I'm a keen hiker, cyclist, mountain biker, skier, all of these things. And I try and spend as much of my time doing that. So while I'm in lockdown in the UK now, or in this coronavirus world where I can't travel, I'm planning on keeping fit and doing as much outdoor sports as possible. It's also I've become quite a keen storyteller across this trip through writing and photography. And so I love reading, writing, and it's nice to have that creative aspect to your trip. And it gives you a much more deep experience.
Yeah. Now, what would you say has been your biggest struggle in life thus far, and how did you overcome it?
Wow. I think it's probably it's kind of a mix between self-confidence and perfectionism. Like I don't think self-confidence comes naturally to me. I can be quite a naturally timid, shy guy. And it's only through keep doing these trips that I keep expanding who I am and what I think I'm capable of. And so that's why when I started doing these trips, it really was very scary. It was a huge expansion of my comfort zone. And it was just because I wanted something to change in my life so much. And each trip that I've done since then has made it get easier with time.
Mm.
And then in terms of the creative aspect that I'm trying to bring, I find it very hard I'm always comparing myself with what other people have done. Yeah. I'm trying to write this book at the moment, and unless it's going to be perfect, I'm going to find it very hard to share with the world or share with the few friends and my mum that wants to buy it. But yeah, so I'm always comparing myself with other people and never really feeling quite good enough.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that you overcome. It's something you keep working on.
Yeah. I don't know why as a society we're always comparing ourselves to others and caring what others think about us and chasing perfection when there's no such thing as perfection.
Yeah, it's so, and you can realize it's so illogical. But I think it's also because we can be quite judgmental in a way.
Hmm. So what would you say, what's your why? What's your purpose for life, getting out of bed every morning?
You cut out a bit, but I'm back.
Am I back now?
Yeah, you're back.
All right.
Yeah, hello?
Yeah. You got me?
Yeah, I got you.
All right. So what is your why or purpose for getting up every day?
I'm a very curious person. I think it's to keep answering the call of that curiosity and to keep learning. And that's both about myself and about the world. I'm a very passionate traveler, and particularly adventure travel to these off-beaten places using like under your own power. And it's becoming increasingly important, as well as answering my own curiosity, to share that with other people and to facilitate other people.
Hmm.
So that's through storytelling, and it's through guiding and all these things, I think there's so much beauty in the world. And I think often we don't hear about it. I'm not just talking about beauty of the places and the landscapes, but of the people and the cultures. And as a society, we often seem quite resistant to difference and change. And I think that having traveled, difference is something to be celebrated. It's kind of the rich texture of life, to realize that there are people living lives that are beyond our wildest dreams. I've stayed with kids that live in a yurt in the mountains with a herd of cows and sheep and goats, and they have to move their house every 2 weeks, always searching for the freshest grass. And their parents live at home in the valley harvesting grass for winter. And I've met children that have to pull themselves across a river in a cage, almost on a zip wire, to get to school and back. And I've met children that are Buddhist monks, 7 or 8 years old, and they're shaved heads, dressed in saffron robes. And they live in this kind of ascetic life of a monk. And the fact that there are people living these lives it's what makes us rich as a human species.
Mm.
And so I think that's something I want to celebrate and promote. And I think through open-mindedness and empathy and understanding, we become a lot more understanding and better people.
Yeah. God, talking to people like yourself just makes me so much excited for this world to open up and start traveling. Like, I haven't really done much travel, but talking to people like you and others that I've done podcasts with, it's just opened my eyes up to the big world that we live in, and there's so much exploration to do. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to hear that effect because I think it is so. I think it's contagious. I remember meeting people that had traveled a lot when I was starting out on my journey, and there was something about them that seemed so open-minded and full of life. And if I can be a fraction of the inspiration that they were, then I think that's really my job done.
Yeah, well, you've inspired me to fucking travel. Like, I'm so excited.
Thanks, dude. We'll keep in touch. I look forward to following your travels. I really
For
think it
sure,
is.
man. It
I
may
think
not
it's
be as extreme as your travels, but I want to get out there in the world and, meet these people that you talk of and all these villages and that. That'd be awesome.
it really doesn't need to be extreme.
Mm.
I'm going for a week-long trip around a really rural part of England next week that I've never been to, called Norfolk. And I'm just going to cycle around with a friend for a couple of days. And it's going to be nothing adventurous. It's going to be country lanes past miles and miles of agricultural farms. There's no scenery, there's no mountains, it's perfectly flat. But I'm really excited. I'm going to go through all the same emotions that I did on the big trip, kind of working out where to cycle, where to sleep, what to eat, and meeting people that I don't know anything about, even though they're my own country. And so you really don't need to go far or do a huge trip.
Mm.
You can have amazing experiences in a very simple way.
Yeah. Well, with COVID, I'm going to do a lot more of Australia. It's kind of sad,
For
as I
sure.
said before, that you've done more of Australia than I have.
Dude, it's an amazing country. It's really something special, much more than I expected, much more deep and rich.
And you missed out on the best part of it, mate.
What's that?
The Blue Mountains, I told you.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure everyone says they come from the best part.
Yeah, it's God's country up here. That's what I say.
Yeah, I'm sure, man. You have to leave everywhere, missing somewhere, so you have a reason to come back.
Yeah, exactly. So, who do you look up to, or do you have someone who inspires you in life?
Wow. Not really. I mean, I think I learn a lesson from everyone I meet.
Yep.
And I try and take a bit away from them. Wow. I don't think I could give any one person. I was writing my book. I was reading the draft of my book yesterday. And there was this guy that I stayed with in Albania. And he showered me with hospitality. And he always went the extra mile. And he was so kind. And I stayed with him for 3 nights while I had food poisoning. And he just looked after me with remarkable hospitality. And I said at the end, "Why have you done this?" And he said, "Because I want to encourage you to do the same to the people you meet in your country." And he said that without stopping to think. It was instinctual.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of attitude. I can't even really remember his name. And I can't even really remember the experience. It's just something I wrote in my diary, wrote in the book. And it's a bit hazy in my memory. But that attitude is just so remarkable that he does something to me altruistically in the hopes that I'll do something to the next person. Good. And it's kind of a cycle that the world slowly becomes a better place.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example of one person that I've learned a lesson from.
Yeah.
That I've implemented into my own life.
There's so many beautiful people in this world. And it's, as I said, like talking to you and others, you see on the media a different side. Like you see all the negative stuff of certain countries and people, and then you talk to people like yourself and you're like, it's nothing like that. Like there's such beautiful people. And it's like, what are the media feeding us, honestly?
The media is so far away from the reality. It's quite shocking. The reason I started writing and taking photos and sharing and speaking the very first time was because I'd been in Turkey for 2 months cycling, and I had amazing hospitality. Every day for 2 months, I'd been given food at least 2 or 3 times. People would hand me watermelons. People wouldn't let me pay for the restaurant meals. People would give me a bag of food and say, "Because you're young and you need energy," and then just walk away. And so I had amazing hospitality. And then there was a terrorist attack in Paris, which was by Turkish-born people.
Yeah.
And the things the media were saying were so shocking and scandalous and so far away from the truth. And I was thinking, the man that handed me the watermelon, he wasn't a terrorist. This woman that invited me into her house and fed me as much as I could eat, she wasn't a terrorist. And it realized that I had a more objective, informed opinion than the media, in a way, and less of a motive. I wasn't trying to sell newspapers or get people to watch my news television show. And I think that's why travel is so important. So you can have your own informed, open-minded view.
Yeah, the media is corrupt.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't even watch the news no more. I just know it's all bullshit.
Yeah. And like I said, they feed on difference. When I was cycling through the Balkan countries, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, these countries in Europe were at war 20, 25 years ago. And they were all so scared of each other. And I'd cycle from Croatia into Bosnia, and the Bosnians would say, "Oh, thank goodness you're out of Croatia. You're safe now. You're in Bosnia. Welcome. You're safe." And then I'd say, "Yeah, cool. I'm cycling into Serbia next." And they'd say, "No, don't cycle into Serbia. It's dangerous in Serbia." And anyway, I'd say, "Don't worry, I'll be okay." I'd cycle into Serbia, and they'd say, "Oh, thank goodness you're out of Bosnia. You survived. You've still got 2 arms, 2 legs." They'd say, "You're safe in Serbia now. Oh, don't go into Albania." And every country was scared of the neighboring country. And yeah, you're like, this is crazy. If only you could meet each other and not be afraid. And I mean, it's different there because they had a war 25 years ago. And I mean, the legacy of that lasts a long time. But people are people.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone wants the same things in life.
100% agree with that. And all I can say is the power of media, they can turn the mentality of a huge amount of people and turn people against people, and it's so wrong.
That's why it's important to, like you're doing with this podcast, to share other people's first-hand accounts and to give people another outlet, more information.
Yeah, sharing the truth. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, for sure. But also encouraging people to go out and find the truth there for yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
Because even people listening to me, it's very different to then go out and hear and experience these things themselves.
Yeah, that's why 100% I'm going to experience a lot of this stuff. I'm so excited for it.
If you have any questions, just get in touch.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I want to record a lot of it too and make like a little video series out of it. That'd be awesome too.
Yeah, dude, that's the way to get to a lot of people. When I do my Africa cycle trip, I think I definitely want to be taking videos and just sharing visually.
Yeah.
What is out there?
Yeah. It's all good to talk about it, but people love to see the visual.
Yeah, firsthand. Put a face to a name and
that's
see
awesome.
it unfold in real time.
So what's next? Where do you see yourself in the next few years?
So I'm kind of starting to, it's still this development of going on my own trips and sharing it through storytelling and also through guiding. So COVID has put a lot of uncertainty into my life. It's closed a lot of doors. So I'm just putting my fingers in as many pies as possible, opening as many doors as I can and hoping something turns out. So I'm planning future trips. I've signed up to guide a few trips, taking school children's away. I've messaged a lot of schools. I do a lot of talks in schools, tying my trip into themes like resiliency and bravery and never giving up and the kindness of strangers. Because these are lessons that not everyone wants to cycle around the world, but everyone can kind of learn from what I experienced along the way.
Exactly.
Just opening as many doors and seeing what turns up.
Yeah. So are you a guide for myself, I could pay and go on a trip with you?
Yeah, so I've been working towards those qualifications for the last year. So yeah, that is possible. But I haven't set that up so much so far, just because it's easier to go to companies that already have the customer base.
Yeah.
So in England, I've signed up for a lot of companies that take children on school trips, or adults that are doing week-long cycle trips or holidays. But eventually, I'd like to get to the stage where I'm putting it out on my Facebook or Instagram. I'm doing this week cycling around Scotland. I'm doing this hike in Morocco. Does anyone want to come?
Awesome. We'll definitely have to catch up sometime in the future and do something.
For sure. That'll be awesome.
So last two questions. When your time's up on this earth, what would you like to be remembered for? And what's your definition of success?
Wow. I wish you told me these in advance.
No, I don't like to. I love to.
Put people on the spot, make them uncomfortable. Wow.
Yes, they're powerful questions, aren't they?
I'd like to be thought of having followed my heart and had integrity. So always having not kind of conformed to society or what I'm being told to do, but listen to what is right for me and then gone ahead and done it. And I think success, it's definitely not about wealth. I hate the way that we measure success in wealth. I always tell people, I'm a sunrise richer. Because I think how we could just as easily measure wealth or success in how many sunrises we've seen, or how many meals we've shared with friends, or how many minutes we've spent laughing in our lifetime. And they're all better measures than money.
Yep.
I think I'd like to be, I think success is, I think it's also how closely you follow your heart, how closely you follow the path that you should be following. Or maybe you don't know and you need to go out there and experiment and find what it is that's your passion, what you're longing for.
Yeah.
But I think success is how closely you follow that. And I think when you are following your own path, it's impossible not to spread joy to people around you. It's quite contagious. I know that there's people that have hobbies that don't interest me at all. But when they're truly following them, it's so contagious to see someone that full of life.
Yeah. You can tell someone who's passionate about what they're doing.
Yeah, even if it's, I don't know, collecting stamps or train spotting or some kind of art that I've never heard of that doesn't interest me. But when they're so into it, that's what consumes their life.
Yeah.
It makes me want to go off and find my zest and do what I want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I love that response. So far, I have not got anyone say that wealth is the definition. I'm waiting for the day. But so far, everyone has chosen, be happy and, follow your dreams and your passions, it's great to see people, following that and, living life a bit more. It's not all about money. Can't buy happiness.
Absolutely. So what's your definition of wealth?
Man.
Or success?
Success, being the best version of myself, really, and just following my dreams. Like, I don't know if you know or not, but for me, I was naturally introverted. So, you know, this is a massive step out of my comfort zone. And now, I've changed my whole mentality. Like before, I would make excuses for doing stuff. And now it's just like, yes, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be the best version of myself. So, and I want to be happy in my passions. So that's success for me.
That's so good. That's so important. I'm naturally introverted too.
Oh, are you?
And yeah, very much. And it's just putting myself in these experiences that has, I'd say, overcome the power of introversion. But I read a book this year called Quiet.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard it, by Susan Cain, and it's about the things that are special to introverts. I mean, she says that it's crazy that we live in a world where it's called the extrovert ideal. Yeah. So everyone thinks it's powerful to be an extrovert. But there's a lot of things that introverts have she almost describes introversion as a superpower. So you're much more perceptive, you're much more sensitive, you're much more in tune with your surroundings and the stimulus around you.
Yeah.
And since that book, I've thought that maybe there's many parts of introversion that are a real benefit to your life.
I'll definitely have to read that book. I think I have seen that before.
It.
Yeah, I'll have to read that.
I can recommend it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I didn't know you were introverted. It's crazy how much, being out in this world, you can grow so much as a person and kind of overcome those barriers.
For sure. You can almost change it.
It's crazy. Like so many people stay in their little bubble in their comfort zone. And that's why I've decided to do this, is to, show what is possible when you take that leap of faith. Like you can grow so much as a person.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my whole mission behind all this.
For sure. Keep it up. It's a really important message that you're spreading. That is really worthwhile for people to know.
Yeah. Well, man, it's been awesome chatting with you. It's been a great chat.
Yeah, you too, buddy.
For all the listeners, where's the best place to find you on socials?
Yeah, so Facebook, Instagram, or my website. I'm Josiah Skeats. So that's Josiah, and then space Skeats.
Awesome.
Facebook, Instagram, you'll find me there.
Awesome. And you also have a website, don't you?
Yeah, that's josiahskeats.com.
Yeah, pretty awesome blogs on there. I've read a few.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, get in touch. I'd be keen to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. And let me know when your book comes out too. I'll definitely be buying that.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, dude. I'll let you know.
Sure, man. Well, once again, thank you for coming on and giving me your time.
No problem at all.
Held out this time. We got through it.
Yeah.
God, it was trouble the other night, but it's all right. Got it all done.
The Wi-Fi was a nightmare.
I know, but it's all right. Thank you, man. Once again, have a good one.
No problem. Catch you later.
Cheers, man.